we spent 20% of our revenue, so about 200,000 in that first year, on sales and marketing activities, which obviously, is a huge proportion of overheads to spend on sales and marketing. And we came back really knowing what we needed to do, where we needed to improve the product, and where the opportunities were. People in a business are everything. The growth of Korvus isn't because of me. I've helped the business, but it's the people who've come in. They're the ones who are doing the what I would consider the more difficult bit. And if you have great people in a business, your business will flourish. I've seen in the past when you don't have the right people in a business, that business can stutter.
Welcome back to Made to Grow, the podcast for ambitious SME manufacturers, brought to you by FlowLens. Today's episode is one that will resonate with any manufacturer who's navigated the tricky transition from scrappy startup to structured scaling business. I'm joined by Stephen Ottaway, Managing Director of Korvus Technology, a scientific instruments manufacturer based in the UK that has grown from £500,000 in revenue and a team of 4 to nearly £4 million and 18 people in just a couple of years. That's the kind of growth that doesn't happen by accident. Stephen shares the honest story behind that journey, the bold early bet on sales and marketing, the moment the orders started to come in faster than they could fulfill them, and the people and process decisions that made the difference between a business that stutters, and maybe shudders, and one that scales. If you've ever wondered when to hire the specialist, how to protect your culture as your headcount grows, or what it actually takes to back yourself and actually go for it, this conversation is for you. Let's get into it. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in to the Made to Grow podcast. I'm Rich Dale. I'm CEO and founder of FlowLens, and today I'm delighted to welcome Stephen Ottaway, who is MD of Korvus Technology. Welcome to the Made to Grow podcast, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Stephen and Korvus are customers of FlowLens, and we've been working with the business since before COVID. Actually, it's been quite a long journey and a deep relationship, which is good. And I, as we've done in the past, have asked Stephen if he would share some insights into the growth journey of Korvus Technology. So, Stephen, before we get stuck into that, would you just introduce yourself a wee bit further? Just tell us a wee bit more about yourself, Korvus, and your journey to MD.
Sure, yeah. My name is Stephen Ottaway. I've been the MD at Korvus since November 2022, so 3.5 years now. I started my career about 20 years ago, actually now, in another scientific instrument company. My undergraduate degree was actually in biochemistry, so I was working in a company which made calorimeters for chemistry and battery applications. I worked there for quite a long time, about 15 years. It was a small company. We grew quite a lot over the time I was there. We grew from about 10 people up to about 35 people. During that time there, I kind of worked my way up. I started off making the teas and emptying the bins, and worked in the lab, did installation, did technical sales, did commercial aspects of the business. During that time, I did an executive MBA at Henley Business School. And then in 2020, we were acquired by a group called Judges Scientific PLC. At that point, I was a director in the business, and I wouldn't say I was a specific title director in terms of my role. I was a little bit sales, a little bit operations, a little bit financial. Because I'd grown with the business, I had quite a wide skill set. I was pretty much like a general manager in the business. And after, exactly, yeah, Mr. knows everything in the business kind of thing. So the business was acquired in 2020 by Judges Scientific PLC, which is a London-based holding company which owns about 25 now small scientific instrument businesses, ranging in size from 1 million revenue all the way up to now about 25 million revenue. And in late 2022, they decided they wanted to move me to Korvus Technology. So Korvus Technology was a very small business, essentially a startup when I joined it. The business was founded in 2015 by a husband and wife team, and they manufactured physical vapor deposition tools, so PVD. And to kind of explain what that is, they are instruments where you have a metal chamber. You pull a vacuum inside the chamber, so you remove all the air from inside. And I don't mean just like you would if you put a Hoover onto a chamber or bag. We're talking removing almost all molecules from inside the chamber. And then you put different materials inside the chamber, and you can use different methods to evaporate the material or release the atoms from the material, such that they travel through the vacuum and deposit a very thin layer of a material onto a substrate or a sample. So this is used. It's actually, although most people have never heard of it, and I'd never heard of PVD until I joined Korvus, it's actually widely used across the world in many different industries. Easy way to explain it that I say to people who aren't in the industry is think of the inside of a packet of crisp. That aluminium layer is done by PVD. Think of glasses, coatings that are on glasses, or TVs. PVD is used in TVs to deposit very, very thin layers. But the technology that Korvus use and the sort of scale that we work on is very much R&D. So we're selling to academia, to industry, who are at the early stages of developing new coating technologies to improve whatever it is they're working on. So examples include semiconductor research, medical devices, and a lot of green energy technology. So again, another easy way to explain this is solar cells, like solar panels that people have on their houses, are not very efficient. They're only, I believe, about 18 to 21% efficient in terms of the amount of energy from the sun that's converted into electrical energy. So there's a lot of research going into how can we make these cells more efficient. And one way of doing this is developing new cells using very thin layers of materials. And that's kind of where our instruments come in.
Excellent. So you mentioned how the business started, and you came in when it was still kind of at a startup stage. You know, you mentioned when we were chatting beforehand that you've now grown the team to about 17, 18 people. So describe that kind of turning point. Whenever you realized, okay, we're ready to move from startup to scale up.
Yeah, so kind of when I joined the business in late 2022, the business had been in a position where it was being run by the founders. Like many scientific instrument businesses in this country, and there's quite a lot in the UK. They're often founder led, and in this case, it was very small. The business had only done about 1.2 million maximum revenue in previous years, and because of COVID and the founders leaving the business was in a bit of a slump when I joined. There was only 3 other employees at the time. The founders had exited the business during the acquisition, and we kind of set about. I would say my strongest skill set in my background is technical sales and marketing, and I've been fortunate that the person who had overseen the business before me, from following the acquisition within Judges, was a quite a highly skilled operations director, and she'd implemented FlowLens and productionized the business. And it meant that I could go in and in the first year really just focus on the sales and marketing. But it wasn't an easy time. We didn't have many orders. It was a lot of scientific instrument companies are 30 years old, and they live on referrals, from labs that they've sold to. But because the business was also very young and hadn't sold many instruments, it was a tough, hard time of traveling the world trying to sell the instrument. And I would say in the first year, I didn't really see it scaling significantly. The kind of inflection point happened when we started to see an uptick in orders based on the efforts we put in, because of course in this type of capital equipment, so we're selling equipment ranging from 50,000 up to, at that point probably only about 150, 200,000. It's not a quick win. It takes time. I think kind of what happened is we started to see the traction from our activities in 2023, towards the end of 2023, and orders started to kind of look like they were exponentially growing. I was also fortunate in that I managed to bring in someone into the business who had a background in R&D, in mechanical engineering, who also had a background in PVD and the instruments that we make. And, you know, his skill set to allow us to uh, expand the technology that we could offer, both in terms of scale and in terms of specification, meant that, as a kind of salesperson at heart myself, that we could go after much more business. I would say it was at that point that I realized that, there was a huge, huge opportunity to grow and scale the business.
And that sort of first year of effectively that market research year and finding, as you said, traveling the world and finding where those opportunities were, you were able to bring back obviously some insights from the market, both in terms of where the demand was, where maybe the low hanging fruit or richer seams of demand were looking like, and also what a sort of development pathway would look like, what the market was demanding versus what maybe your competitors could look like. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. And I think, one of the reasons I joined this business, obviously I took a risk going from, where I was a director and kind of second in command to the MD at the time in the other business, which was about a 10 million plus business, to joining a business which had only did 500,000 in revenue and made a loss in 2022. Was I saw the potential of the product. And I think that's what judges saw when they purchased the business. Was, although it was essentially a startup, the unique design of the product meant that we had something different. And for anyone listening who's a salesperson, particularly although it's niche, it's in scientific instrument world, it's more of a competitive niche. Having something that's different to the competition and has a USP was, I could tell that this would be a flyer. I think one of the benefits in that 2023, it because we had the backing of judges. Normally, of course, when you're running a business privately, you have to, really think about cash flow. But because we had the financial backing of judges, it meant that, we could really just go hell for leather on selling and the market research. We spent 20% of our revenue, so about 200,000 in that first year, on sales and marketing activities, which obviously, is a huge proportion of overheads to spend on sales and marketing. And we came back really knowing what we needed to do, where we needed to improve the product, and where the opportunities were. And that just happened to coincide with, bringing in this really good R&D manager who then enabled us, because a lot of the time in 2023 we had conversations with customers, but we couldn't meet what they were asking. So bringing in that skill set was really crucial for the next step.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with FlowLens. Now, back to the interview. It's one of the sort of struggles, we're a product company as well, obviously, but a software business, but you're constantly talking to customers in the market and understanding, where you fit and where the opportunities for growth are. But whilst, maintaining a kind of scalable product range as opposed to getting into the world of bespoke software. And I've seen your systems firsthand. They're a remarkable looking product. They're and they're quite a versatile product. You've got lots of capabilities, and you can customize it. Has there ever been a risk where you get too far into a certain set of requirements that it almost becomes a bespoke solution, or have you been able to structure that so that you can grow around that?
Yeah, in the scientific instrument world that I've kind of been in for 20 years, is there's massive risks to that. And I've seen that firsthand a lot, particularly in the previous company I was in that you get an inquiry, you get a request, and you chase that request. And you build something which doesn't have future potential. So, in this industry, key is whatever you are doing, even if it's custom, let's say, is that custom product or service has future potential. And that's one of the big drivers. I think within Korvus, we didn't have that problem at that point. I mean, to be honest, we have it more now. We didn't have it at that point because the product was so immature. We knew that what we were developing was already made by a lot of the competition, and therefore it wasn't unique. It was really just getting us up to the same. It was getting us up to the same level to compete with the much bigger players in the market.
And whereas now you've got a platform, and you can look for those areas or options to sort of differentiate.
Yeah, exactly. So, the PVD market in which we're in is, for scientific instruments, as I mentioned, competitive. So, it puts pressures on your pricing, it puts pressures on your gross margins. So we're always looking for new technologies that we can implement. And we're to that end, we actually work with a number of companies in the UK um, to differentiate our product, to offer something unique.
And what would you mean with do you mean with your distributors, or do you mean with your customers to continue that kind of R&D conversation, and continue to develop the products?
Yeah, it's actually what I would consider suppliers, collaborators. So
Right.
these are other companies in the coating industry who have some type of technology which is very niche, but has a requirement from a customer. So we're looking to work with them to differentiate ourselves, to make us stand out.
Yeah. I suppose that it's a, a different strategy compared to some of the larger players who are kind of stuck in a more uh, well, traditional way of thinking, where that collaboration approach allows you to move much quicker and try things out, I suppose.
Yeah, we are, although we've grown significantly, we're still quite small. So we can be quite agile. But we're definitely in the point now where we have to make sure that, what we are doing in our development plan is what there is a requirement for and not a one off.
Yeah. So, sort of continuing on that theme of kind of growing pains and and risks, over the last couple of years, as the team was growing, what are the kind of biggest challenges that you've had to overcome as the team and the product range have expanded?
Yeah, so we've grown quite significantly. So we've gone from doing, we did about 1 million in revenue in 23 to, last year we did about 3.8 million in revenue. So we have, the growth has been quite exponential, and that has brought challenges. The team is now about 18 of us. I think there's been challenges in, twofold. I would say is the people challenges is the first thing. When you're a very small team, um, it's very easy for everyone to kind of just get on with their job and do what they need to do, and you just have this instinctive trust in each other. But when you get bigger, then the management of staff becomes more challenging, and making sure that people know what their job is, know what the cultural values of the company are, and you don't deviate from that. Um, you know, when there was four, five, six of us, I was there very much involved, and it was a very small, tight knit group. But now, when you have 18 and you have different departments, it's I think the key for me is making sure that the people who I have now running these departments are instilling the kind of cultural values that I started in the business, and we don't deviate from there. I think the other key thing has been process. Um, again, when you're very small, people know what they're doing. They know the process. You don't really deviate. But when you get bigger, you have to have much more structure to the process. So, SOPs are critical in terms of making sure everyone is doing everything correctly. Documentation, um, all of these type of what might be considered a bit more uh, boring stuff. You just have to nail that down,
Hmm.
because it's just very difficult to maintain what you had initially.
And is there a sort of a carrot and stick approach to reinforcing the need for that as part of your sort of overarching cultural tenets, or how do you reinforce that?
Yeah, I think it comes from the top. So if as long as the people who are managing the departments are following the process, are doing it correctly, then everyone will follow into line. Um, I wouldn't say stick is something we use too prominently. Um, I think we more, just encourage people to do it. And I think the key is showing them why it's important, and, why it works and why it's useful. And I think once people understand that, then they naturally will do what you need them to do.
Hmm. I mean, it reaches right back to the customer in terms of that reassurance and differentiation of quality business processes, that the products that they are buying off you are backed up by those processes, and they don't necessarily need to come and visit to see that those are happening, but they were reflected in the quality of the end product that they receive, and the attention to their needs, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the best, what I always say to our sales team is, the best salespeople in the scientific instrument industry, and in most industries is your customers. And it's particularly relevant for us because you might have a researcher in a university in Spain who's doing solar cell research, and they will go to a conference in, let's say, in France, and they'll talk to colleagues in Germany, or they might be collaborating with them. And if you do a good job, if they're happy with that instrument, then they're going to tell their colleagues that Corvus is a good company to work with. They make good products, they have good service, and then the referral leads will follow. And of course, that's how a lot of scientific instrument companies, their business grows and develops. But for us, because we're at the very early stages, it's even more important because we have less customers. We need to make sure the ones we do have are happy.
Hmm. So turning to the next kind of 3 to 5 year period, you've obviously got your kind of corporate objectives, and judges want to see continued growth in the business. But from your personal standpoint as MD, and how do you see the next 3 to 5 years pan out? What vision are you creating for the team? That presumably there's further growth, in the future.
Yeah, so we actually have a 2030 roadmap, and this is being driven by my now R&D director, who was my R&D manager. And we developed a product roadmap, which we've actually, we stylized it, we got it printed out. It's in big format in our break area in our factory, showing our employees what we see as our growth potential, and what products we're looking to develop by year, and how these will address the market. Um, our big thing for 2030 is, we want to become a leading player in this industry. And I know from my background in scientific instrument companies that if we if we bring in great people, if we do the right things, then this is possible for us because we have a unique product, and that's a great starting point. Um, yeah, we want to be there in that top tier of PVD companies.
Hmm. Well, it's great that it's clearly stated, that people can't um, say they don't know where you want to go and what part they are going to play in that journey?
I think that's actually really important for small companies because what often can happen is when you're a small business and if you're someone who's come into the business and you're quite ambitious, you can see the R&D director above you, the ops manager, the MD, and you can kind of think, what are my options in this company? Where can I go? And I think the fact that we are showing our ambition to the employees shows that if we can execute this, then they will grow alongside the business, and they have significant career potential here, and therefore I think you lose less staff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As part of that roadmap, what kind of capabilities are you thinking about or starting to build now that don't exist or haven't been necessary even in the last couple of years of growth?
I think it's more moving from what I would consider like generalists to specialists. In the past, you might have had a guy in production who's looking after your stock, who's doing the shipping. Um, but as we develop, we're getting to a point where we need a specialist stock person. We need someone who's a specialist in shipping. Obviously we ship all around the world. We export probably 95% of our products, um, and it's building that skill set as you go. But it's a slow transition. We're not in a position where we can just tomorrow increase our overhead significantly by bringing in one, two, three extra staff. We have to take the what we consider the generalists that we've had from the company growth and focus them into areas and then supplement the skill sets that we have. And within our business, it's a high technology business. We are also particularly focused in engineering, so electrical, mechanical, and then the application side, so specialists in material science, in physics. That's kind of the specialist skills that we kind of need.
So, Stephen, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time. It feels like there's an awful lot more detail we could get into, perhaps for a follow-up podcast in another year or so, whenever some of this is played out. But in the meantime, I'd like to finish the episode with some actionable advice from our guests. So for an SME manufacturer listening to this who's in a similar position, they're growing fast, they're feeling some of those pressures, and those decisions that you have to make as to where you're going to put that budget, um, or that kind of, where you focus the R&D. What's the one piece of advice that you would leave listeners with?
Yeah, I think the kind of advice that I give to people in our business, and what I've kind of learned, particularly in the last kind of 10 years, is I'm a big believer in the relationship approach to business. I feel like if you build strong relationships, then the rest follows. And that's with your staff, with your customers, with your suppliers. Treat them well, build strong relationships with them, and then they'll give back to you. Um, and you know, the other big thing I would say is people. People in a business are everything. Um, the growth of Korvus isn't because of me. I've helped the business, but it's the people who've come in. They're the ones who are doing the what I would consider the more difficult bit. And if you have great people in a business, your business will flourish. I've seen in the past when you don't have the right people in a business, that business can stutter. And I would say don't be afraid to make a change. If and I'm not a person, I'm not an advocate for hire and fire, but I'm just saying get the right people in the business. And I think I would just add like a final point is a couple of books that I would recommend for everyone to read. One is actually called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I'm sure a lot of you have probably read it, but
I thought you were going to
getting the
the right people and the right in the bus and the right seats.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So as I say, I'm like the driver of the bus, but having them key people. And the one other book, which before I start talking, is, and this was one that I remember getting on the first day of my MBA, is Peter Drucker, about the executive and the inner elephant. And I think this also relates to personal life. Is it's about controlling your emotional side, your inner elephant. And I see this a lot in business, and particularly in, within businesses, R&D versus sales. You see a lot of emotional takeover of people, and controlling your inner elephant and getting your staff to control their emotions and to not act emotional really does make a massive difference.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I mean, it's that inner voice that you speak to most of the day, throughout your entire life. So being aware of what its place is and how you manage that is very much a key to unlocking success and discipline, relationships, you name it. It's not a book I've actually heard of, so I'm going to have to go and add that one to my list. Well, Stephen, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time you've given us today. Obviously, we'll include your LinkedIn and your website address for Korvus in the show notes, if listeners would like to get in touch. And so it just remains for me to thank you once again for joining us on Made to Grow.
Thank you, Rich.
Stephen's journey with Korvus is a brilliant reminder that growth doesn't come from one big decision. It comes from a series of the right ones, made at the right time and learning from your mistakes as you go along. Back yourself in the market, bring in the people who fill the gaps you can't fill yourself, and make sure your processes can carry the weight of the business you're building. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to Stephen's LinkedIn profile and the Korvus Technology website, and the books he mentioned, Good to Great by Jim Collins, and Peter Drucker's work on the effective executive. If you find this episode useful, please do subscribe and leave us a short review. It genuinely helps more manufacturers like you find the series. Until next time.